Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast,
the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education.
The goal is to provide meaningful conversations to what is currently happening in our classrooms.
Stories, pains,
moments of success.
We want to hear it all.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Under the Hat podcast. I'm your co-host, Steve Martinez. And as always, I'm joined by the amazing, the lovely Sophie Young. Sophie, how are you today?
I am fabulous today. I actually almost forgot we were doing this. I was enjoying my day with my boys so much, watching them play. And then my husband comes in from putting up our solar panels and he goes, "Are you podcasting today?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Hold on.
No, yeah, this is Saturday. Yeah, normally.
I know.
Yeah, so this is where time zones are really tricky, right? So like for those that have been listening, like for me, it's a good 10 a.m. right? But Sophie, like this is later in the day, so we really appreciate you being a part of this wild journey that we're on. It is November now, friends. So we're in a place, at least in my area, where like just like that Halloween hit and be like, okay, cool, weather's going to be cold now. California cold. So if you don't judge me too much.
Yeah, we've already had freezing temperatures and frost over here in West Virginia. Lana is in my time zone. It is a good 1 p.m. over here.
That's right.
Yes. So she could probably understand how my morning could have gotten away from me.
Yes. Yeah. Football games are happening right now, right?
Yes. Yes. Lots of football, lots of fall activities, pumpkin patching, apple picking, gorgeous outside. We have seasons over here, Steve.
I mean, the way the trend has been over here. So Lana, I'm in Central California, so in the boring part of the state where it's a lot of agriculture, but it's a lot of heat in the same time, like dry heat. So every year I'm thinking like, man, it's October. It has to cool up like by now. And there has been a few Thanksgivings where we're literally like in shorts and shirts, which is wild to me because because that wasn't the case like when I was a kid. It was definitely cold by that point in the calendar year. But yeah, so weather is wild. Lana, thanks for being here with us. Really appreciate you jumping on and sharing everything that you have to offer to us and as well as anyone listening and watching.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Sophie and Steve. Excited to talk with you today.
Super excited to talk about your book, Unlocking SEL. But before we dive into that, I want to say this about your bio is Lana is a renowned keynote speaker, avid pickleball player, dog mom, and the founder of groundbreaking courses like SEL Jumpstart, a mini course designed to help educators stop delaying and start doing with SEL. And no matter what she's doing, Lana brings a unique blend of engaging storytelling, wit, which is very appropriate with my tiara today, emotional connection, and practical insights, making her style truly unforgettable. Lana, now knowing what we have said about you, we know we've got the Unlocking SEL. And for those who don't know about you and your other past, tell us about your education journey.
Yes. Again, thanks for having me. I'm Lana, former principal and CEO now of my company, Unlocking SEL. And currently, I help schools around the country implement social and emotional learning to really increase positive student outcomes and decrease teacher burnout. That is very important too. And really want to do that all through the lens of mindfulness. And so that's what I love to do. I'm super passionate about social and emotional learning and how that can impact positive school climates. And again, I'm currently residing in sunny Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have had a frost also. But thank you for having me. And yeah, my first book came out not too long ago, just about a month ago. So I'm excited going around and kind of sharing with people this idea of creating a SEL framework and how that can really impact schools.
Yeah. I do. So since, as you know, like since the pandemic, probably the start of the pandemic, SEL is something that has been kicked around more, right? And
Mm-hmm.
discussed in more detail. Though, like, talking with teachers myself on the regular and kind of getting the pulse of what's going on, even in my own area locally, it's almost like teachers kind of view it as like, oh, it's this other thing we have to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, you look at, like, okay, so in California, like, where there's legislation, we're like, cool, we're gonna get a little bit more purposeful with literacy. Now we have to combat the AI thing. Now we have, like, curriculum changing, standards adjusting, and so I'm kind of, and I know we're gonna dive into this, but, like,
Mm-hmm.
ways of making this work, because it is important work. It is something that
Mm-hmm.
teachers should be doing, but also
Mm-hmm.
making it obtainable um,
Mm-hmm.
or implementation, which I know that we're going to get to.
But your first dive into this really big, deep dive wasn't because of the pandemic. It was because another event happened in your life, right?
Hmm.
Yes, yes. So actually, I became a principal in 2008, actually in Portland, Oregon. So I was on the West Coast, is where I got my first principalship.
Hmm.
And I remember walking in and really thinking, what I'd learned in principal school. This is all about like raising test scores of this underperforming school. And so that's what I was really hired to do. And I was like full on, that typical personality. We are going to raise our test scores. It became all about that. And so my second year, we had the crisis of a school fire during the school day. So literally our school burned down. And the good news is everyone escaped, but we were all, as you can imagine, significantly impacted. And this was already a community that had been trauma impacted anyway. And then we had that on top of it. And what it did over time was give us a moment to kind of pause. And it gave me a moment to pause, like, what am I doing as a principal? Like, who am I becoming? Like this, come on, let's go, let's get started. That kind of urgency and energy that I was bringing. But I kind of left out that really important part of really building community. And so we chose social and emotional learning as kind of the pathway towards healing from that crisis, because our community was really in pieces after that had happened. And over time, what we found with this social and emotional learning is, first of all, we left the teachers behind. So we were just like doing social and emotional learning to the students. And so we realized that's
Mhm.
not going to work. We have to slow down and do like this dual path of caring for the emotions of everyone, because we all had experienced that trauma. And so once we began to do that and really go all in school wide, more than just explicit student SEL lessons, but how do we kind of create the framework around it? We really saw pretty amazing results with, decrease in referrals and suspensions, increase in academics, and this decrease of teacher burnout. And we're like, we're on to something here. What is really going on? And I would argue now almost every school's been through like their own version of the fire through the pandemic. So I think we were early adopters because we were forced to be. But now I want to help schools that have all been through this pandemic. Like, there's a better way to do schooling. And in my perspective, it's through social and emotional learning.
Yeah.
Gives me
I
chills just to think about that and what your school went through. Whew, just can't
Thank you.
imagine.
Yeah, and I love the community piece of what you talked about, right? Because oftentimes what I hear, like, when SEL is discussed, it's really laser focused on the kids, on the
Mm-hmm.
students. And
Mm-hmm.
that's cool. That,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not, saying that's a bad thing, but it's almost like what that looks like and what that means for the adult in the room, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because they're having you focus on what does that look like, and the support for the teachers, and particularly with burnout and everyone else involved too, right? Like any other stakeholder that is involved with education, and even parents, right? So I just love that piece of, like, community build around this topic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this inference that the educators are fine, so let's just go deliver social and emotional learning. Now, I would like to say I was this wise principal that had this all figured out. That was not it at all. What happened was we were teaching a lesson on gratitude. And I went into the classrooms, and it was the flattest lesson you'd ever seen. It was like, name a time in your life that you've been grateful. And the teachers, they might as well have been talking. I don't know. It was like terrible. There was no heart involved at all. And I wondered, I remember going back and saying, I mean, it wasn't just one teacher. It was the majority of our teachers who were really good teachers, but it was just such a flat lesson. And I remember thinking, I wonder if we talked about gratitude in the staff meeting. So the next staff meeting we did. Think of a time in your life that you have felt gratitude. Someone has expressed or extended gratitude to you. And then I shared a story for myself. And I said, you know, we give our kids everything. What if we could also teach them to appreciate it? And what would that be like for school if we begin to say please and thank you, and to really care about things that were given to us, and then also give to others? And then we went back and taught that lesson, and what a difference. It was like this little mini experiment. And I realized we have to unpack these topics, because I don't know about you folks, but I didn't have any of this in school. Nobody talked about gratitude or self-awareness or self-management. So to expect teachers who are exhausted and overwhelmed to teach this when they didn't have it or experience it in their jobs is a really big ask.
Yeah. I certainly didn't experience anything like that in school. And because I'm glad you bring the ability to like regulate and really be more in tune with yourself. Had I been given those skills earlier on in life, I think things would have just I may not be here. I may be not saying better or worse, but just somewhere different, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely certain things in my life and in Steve's life that probably would not have happened if we had learned how to regulate early on. I'm ADHD, so regulating my emotions is a task. They're very big emotions. They come on very, very quick. And having any kind of education besides take a deep breath about my emotions would have just changed. It would have changed my life if I was a child and learned those things and had practice and had people modeling and the words to communicate would have changed. It would have just been completely different.
Yeah, it kind of makes me sad sometimes when I think about social and emotional learning and how it's being implemented in some places where teachers aren't even trained on it. And it's a curriculum. Here you go teach this curriculum. And we have zero room in our schedule to do this. We've had no training, and we don't even feel that way. So it's just way too much. So that's what I was hoping my book could really help people. Like, we have to slow down with what we're asking of schools, and nothing is worth rolling out if we don't roll it out and set it up to be successful. And in my perspective, explicit SEL lessons are only one component. We would never have had the changes we had if that was all we did. It's an important component, but it's not everything. There's so much more around it.
I am interested in this, being one of those teachers that felt like there was never any time to do character education, because that was what they were pushing when I was teaching, to do any of this development. How do you blend it in? You said explicit ones are not the only component.
That's right.
What else
That's
is
right.
it?
Well, I like to think of it as like 5 keys, and that's what I really discuss. And the first is like laying the foundation, that means we are actually training staff on what is social and emotional learning and why it's needed. We need to share the data of where kids are today, share the data of teacher burnout and what it really looks like. Let people know what stress does to our body, what dysregulation feels like. So build that foundation. And then, believe it or not, I think the second key is centering adult SEL. I know that makes some people go, whoa, wait a second. We've been taught all along to center the kids. I think we can do both. And I think we have to. And we have to really support our educators with stress management, work-life balance, creating a community of care where people feel cared for. And I will say, I like to say a caveat here. we're not just talking self-care. That is important. We all are responsible for caring for ourselves, but we also have to have some context where we feel like there is a collective care around us. And in the work I do around the country, that is a rarity, sadly, in a lot of our schools today. So those things, and then we get to the student SEL strategies. And I talk about 7 different strategies, one of which is the explicit SEL lessons. And then we talk about, okay, how do we take this school-wide? So just imagine everybody doing this kind of SEL work. I think doing that is a wellness model. It moves things upstream, and it will really take care of a lot of stuff of how we're in such a reactive, dysregulated places in a lot of our schools today.
I'm curious just because of this is a whole school-wide initiative type of thing when you go to do something like this.
Mm-hmm.
How long is like the building the foundation and all and getting them to buy in? Because I'm just imagining my previous faculties that I've been a part of. There's that one grumpy person in the back of the room being like, kids these days are too soft. Like, how do you,
Yes.
how do
Yeah.
you,
There's more than
how,
one.
Yeah.
oh yeah,
I
there's
taught
at
with more
least
than
one
one of
though.
those. Yeah,
And
at least one.
sadly, I can say this from being a principal, it's often the principal. I mean, let's be
Oh,
real here. Yeah, I shoot it
Oh,
straight with my folks. You've got to lean into this training. You've got to participate. You can't sit in the back and be on your phone. I'm going to need you to be all involved if we're going to do this. And so what I do is I lead schools through 5 sessions over the year, and we can see huge changes in 1 year if they will dedicate the time to it, lean into the work, and there's a readiness factor of the principal and the leadership. And I expect some teachers will be that way, like you said, like, oh, we don't have time for this. But here's how I think that can really soften is when you start with the adults. So my first 2 sessions are all focused on the adults. And they're like, thank God, finally, where has this been? I mean, that is the overwhelming majority of responses that I get when I talk about the adults. Like, let me just share this one more part, and then we can move on for this. This is how important I think it is. I read some data not too long ago that actually education is the most stressful profession there is. Like number 1, okay? Now, knowing that, whether you could argue whether that's 1, 2, or 3, it's very high, whatever that is. Then you ask, how many educators have had something in stress reduction? Okay, we know it's the most stressed. Okay, how many have had stress reduction? Less than about 20% is what I see. So that is why we have to start there. We have to calm the bodies down. We have to support the educators so they can show up differently, so they can model a new way of being. And that is really a differentiator than my program and a lot of programs, which will go directly to the student, doesn't work. It's misguided at best. And often what it can do at worst is cause more stress on the teachers. And that's not what social emotional learning is supposed to be. You can
I
see I
love
got
that.
some feelings. I got some feelings about this.
I love it, and I feel like you should be, and like we all should be, because the teachers, the adults in the building, are human beings too, with
Yes.
with very similar, or if not the same, stressors and traumas situations to like overcome and deal with. And you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't model becoming regulated if you don't know how to regulate yourself.
Yes.
So, and that's something, becoming a parent and learning how to regulate my emotions to help my child learn how to regulate their emotions, and all out that's in my house because both my sons are autistic. So it's a lot, it's learning it myself for myself before I can even try to teach it to my children. And I think that's, yes, I agree 100%. You've got to start with the adults
Mm-hmm.
first.
I
This is amazing.
I keep on thinking about, like, just in the last like few minutes, of normally the relationships between the teachers at a school and the principal. And normally what you see there is a relationship that either doesn't exist or is broken in some way. And I can't speak to every school or every, but you just go into a break room, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of hear what's discussed, the feelings, and whether all feelings are valid, but like whether teachers understand the full situation of maybe different problems that are in their communities or in their district. It is something that's telling of like, how do we begin to start making, healing those wounds, regardless of how they got there. And it just, it's really hard in that situation from manager, even a middle manager, to a grouping of individuals. It's hard to heal that. And Lon, I don't know what your experience has been with that, but like that is to me like what I'm hearing is like a good first step of moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think about kind of the old me pre-fire. Would I have been able to do this work? I don't know, to be honest. Like I think many principals, we go through principal school, which is a kind of false narrative that we're told or we're sold about what the job is going to be. And then we get in the job and we realize it's super lonely, it's super hard, it's nearly impossible. There is no workload balance, work-life balance. And so that, I think, is a really important thing for us to look at. And in fact, I do a lot of training with districts around the country and Mindful Leaders Network, where I pull the principals and I help us just like feel into this a little bit, soften a little bit, care for ourselves. And it's okay to not work on Saturday, and don't text or email your staff late at night. They don't want your emails anyway. And it's okay to be a whole person. And so there's this whole thing around that too. If you really want to go way upstream, we've got to look differently on how we treat our principals, because if they have this feeling of I'm being bullied, guess what they do? They turn that right to the teachers, who then often turn that right to the students. So it's this overall softening and turning towards like kindness and care all the way around that can make a big difference. It really can soften, and just people softening can make a huge difference.
Yeah. And you've so what I'm about to ask, like you've touched on this some, but maybe going into the weeds of it just a little bit, like the implementation, right? So let's say that I'm a principal and I do see this need for SEL to be at my school. And maybe I'm in a larger district that maybe that's not the priority or the initiative from on top, right? For better, for worse, like whatever the case is. Where can a leader at a school, like a school site leadership, like where can they begin to start looking at implementation, and perhaps what does that look like maybe over a course of a school year, let's say, because I'm assuming it would take that long for proper implementation.
Yeah, and I think you get into some of the nuances of this, which is this idea that some schools have their own funding bucket that they use. Oh, I have some funds that I'm going to use to SEL. Many don't. So many are trying to get the money from the district, which may or may not even support SEL. So then and some schools are paying for it one way, some are using the PTA money, some have no money at all. I mean, it is just really no way to run a business, right? It's just how this works. In a perfect world, maybe I could say in a perfect world, a district has decided to really buy into social and emotional learning. And the district then, wait for it, trains, funds, and resources, and provides time to really roll this out in a way that it can be successful. And why I think it is the starting point is it is an umbrella, if you will, because it is about making the whole environment kinder, and more positive. So it is the umbrella of when all the other work can live under. And that's what we had to make some hard decisions. It was the focus. Everything else was buckets of work under that. So once we make that decision, let's just say we would roll this out, where we would then teach the staff about these things. Again, like what I said, why it's important, stress reduction strategies, what that can look like in your own life. Then we would roll out student SEL, where we would teach, this is how you teach regulation in your classroom through a mindful moment. All right. This is how you do peace corners in your classroom. This is how you do soft starts in your classroom, how you model regulation. And I can talk on all of those different components, but I just wanted to share one. And then we get it teed up for, then we implement the student SEL explicit curriculum. Only then. So all of these other things are in place. And now we're like, okay, we're ready to go. So give us whatever that is, whether it's Mind Up or any of the other different kinds of trainings that there are. There's some really good student SEL training, but you have to be ready and it has to be teed up. So then you have that on and wait for this part. You have a carved out time of an SEL block every week, the whole school teaching that at the same time. Could you imagine? And we have schools that are doing that right now, is where they have an SEL block where they're teaching the same lesson on the same day. So everyone's talking about gratitude at the same time. And all of that stuff really builds up. And after a few years, the school is really unrecognizable for the changes that can be made. I've seen it work. We did it in my school. It's been repeated at some other schools. And I believe it really is a way forward that can really shift schools.
It's so like we often hear on the news or you know, a lot in your particular situation with the fire, right? Like you see like how one incident, one thing, like trauma shifts an entire school.
Yes.
But if you all are doing, like, if you flip it on its head, you're like, hey, we're all going to purposefully work on this thing today. This, like, on during third period, we're doing this. It's kind of just like taking like what normally happens on the trauma side and really trying to just make that shift in a purposeful way, by leaning into that positivity, that type of energy. Yeah, I just love that.
It's this idea of this wellness model, right? Let's put more attention at the front end where we're creating this community where these other things don't happen near as often as they used to. But what I hear over and over and over is, how do we handle this one problem that comes up? How do we do this? It's not like, how do we prevent this by creating the conditions where we're just kinder to each other? We're just in a happier, healthier place. I mean, imagine that schools are just healthy, happy places. It's like we've just gotten away and we've just accepted kind of the state that schools are in today. And I'm saying we don't have to do that. There's another way.
It's where students want to come to school because it's a fun, happy place to be instead of just a place where, you
And
said that
teachers want to work, and teachers want to work, and principals want to be, and principals want to stay. Imagine,
Yeah. You mentioned how schools can change. So I'm assuming impacting academic performance, the vibe, you might say, emotional well-being. So how is this, in your experience, the ones that have done this, how have they changed?
Well, I love that you use the word vibe. I use that word a lot, like vibe in education. It's all about the vibe. Wherever we go, it is about, how does it make you feel when you come in? Whatever it is. So from the moment you come in a school, you guys have probably been to schools around the country, you can make a lot of assumptions by how it feels from the moment that you come in, whether it's the front doors of the classroom or of the school as a whole. So yes, we want that vibe to feel a certain way that creates this sense of happiness and belonging. But if you ask me, like, specifically, I think the question was, can it impact academic performance? Because I got to be honest, I was worried about that, right? When we do a soft start and we're taking 10 to 15 minutes every morning and we're creating community, what's going to happen over time? I was like, but amazingly, our performance went up. We became the highest performing Title I school by a long shot in both math and reading in the whole city of Portland. And it was because we did these things. So if you're really prioritizing community, belonging, you have less distractions, right? You have students that are focusing every day through the mindful moment. We built our focus muscles. We were better able to focus. We were better regulated. We had fewer issues between the students and between the students and the teachers. The teachers got along better. It just created conditions where you could learn, where we calmed the amygdala down a little bit. and then we could learn. And so that made a huge difference, just really regulating the whole school. And I see over and over again, the performance goes up anyway, versus this other model where this fear-based model where we take everything away from kids and we're like, do this, study all the time, work super hard, so hopefully you'll get the grades that you want. And that's just no way to live our lives.
Yeah, I have this memory, like right before I left the high school classroom, and mind you, this was like right after the pandemic, right? So like nerves were already kind of weird. And I just remember just having conversations with my students about that, where they're like, I can't juggle
Mm-hmm.
all of it, like everything that's being asked of me, of every single one of my classes, on top of like, because it's the stuff that like is mandatory that they have to do,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's the stuff that they love to do. But because their bucket is so full,
Mm-hmm.
then they have to make a choice. I'm like, what is this all about? Is this about the stuff I have to do, or can there be a little bit left in that bucket for the stuff that I love to do, right? And then those that decide to do both are just miserable. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would see them like athletes that are like really fit, that are like, and part of it is like, stop drinking the Red Bull, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's like a little bit of that, but there's also the piece of it where like the whole thing is like we're just asking so much of our kids, and then we wonder why that they hate school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just love this idea of like finding, obtainable ways of regulating and kind of moving stuff around to make that
Mm-hmm.
bucket just look different for the kids and for the teachers.
It reminds me of yesterday, actually, I did a training of a high school staff who who their kids were really trying their best to get into Ivy League schools. That was the goal from when they were in kindergarten. And just imagine the pressure. And so the strategy we talked about was incorporating a soft start. That was one of many things that we talked about. This idea of the first 10 to 15 minutes, create community, create belonging, check in with your students, make them feel glad that they're there. I said, it's just like you go to a party. You want the host to say, hey, I'm glad you came today. I mean, instead of like, you're behind, get going, here you go. The second they got in. And it was really surprising, Steve. At the end, I always ask everybody, what was the most important thing that you thought about or you got from this training? About 75% put soft start.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, so in high school, I would have inferred that's not happening a lot. We've got kids that are coming, and from the second they come in, get going, let's go. Yes. And we lose our humanity. Sophie was talked earlier about like teachers are humans. Our kids are humans. Like it's humans. It's human nature to want to start something softly and know that someone cares that we showed up.
And part of it is how we train teachers to begin with, though.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like being in the credentialing space now, like we tell them like anticipatory sets and how
Each bell to bell.
bell to
Yes.
bell.
Bell ringers, those things. Yep.
The bell
Yes.
ringers. Yeah, we like dive in right into the content and and I think that it's okay to teach those strategies, but also be like, why does it have to be on the content? Like, why does it have to be like out of the gate? Like, do that anticipatory set. I just hate that term. Like, it's so like, it's almost too formal for me. But like, if you are going to do a bell ringer or a warm up, why does it have to be about the content? Why can't it be about the human? And I think if we can shift that, in other places than the classrooms themselves, I think that's the other part of it too, is like these folks go into the credential program and they get a certain thing and then they see that model in a certain way. It kind of goes back to like, well, instead of modeling that, we should also be modeling the self-regulation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I do know that you go ahead, Sophie. Go ahead.
Something you said where like they are the soft starts that hit me is like they're happy you're here. Even
Mhm.
just to say that to
Mm.
some kids might be the
Mhm.
only time they've heard that in like
Mm. Mhm.
years, maybe,
Mhm.
or like at all.
Mhm.
Um, I'm so happy you're here. Because I
Mhm.
remember I was not the perfect teacher. I was not. And if I were to go back into the classroom now, my classroom would be a completely different place than it was when I was a teacher. And I remember internally groaning when certain students would walk in my classroom and I'd be like, I wish they were absent today.
Yeah.
But how many times does that
Mhm.
child feel that
Mhm.
vibe for coming from an
Mhm.
adult?
Mhm.
No
And they can
wonder they're a
feel that.
disruption.
They
Yeah.
could feel that. Yeah.
No wonder they're a disruption when that's coming
Mhm.
at them all day long.
Well, let me share another example. Let's go down from high school to let's go all the way down to kindergarten. One of the schools I was working with, literally from the moment the bell rang, they then sent the kindergarten kids off to their leveled reading groups. They're 5. They had just gotten to a brand new space, and the second day there, they were sent to another space. Rather than, hey, can we wait 15 minutes before we send 5-year-olds out to small reading groups? I'm not saying leveled reading groups are not important, but the first thing to do is to recognize their little humanness and to bring them in and to have a little place that they can feel like they belong to a part of something better and bigger than them, a community. And from there, that's first, then we teach them. We've really gotten away from a lot of that in schools.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the time.
We
We
don't
don't
have
have
the time.
time to do this because we have this, and this to do, and it's all about raising their test scores, right? But like you
Yeah.
said, if you build that community, then a lot of the distractions are not going to occur, giving you actually more time, and not even more time, but quality, higher
Yes.
quality of time.
Absolutely.
Now, I mean, speaking of time, like, so Lana, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that like the SEL component can live simultaneously while standards are being taught. Like, I'm just
Yes,
making that
absolutely. And
assumption.
there are absolutely there's SEL standards now in many states also.
Mm,
But you could use that in, I think at the end, we were using it as our health block, is what we were plugging in for
okay,
a SEL block.
okay. Because that kind of, not maybe not completely for some folks, but like that helps address that issue of time,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Where it's like you can, I keep on, and not to compare SEL to digital citizenship, but I'm just thinking of like the sense of like what general implementation may look like, right? So
Hmm.
this concept of like, you teach some digital citizenship type of standard
Hmm.
alongside your actual content, right? Like, I'm just thinking of
Yeah.
like maybe even having like inspiration for folks, like
Yep.
of like examples of what that may look like. Um,
Hmm. So, Steve, we had it on Wednesday morning and we called it Wellness Wednesday. It was a
mhm,
school-wide block from 9 to 9:30 through K through 3, and then we were K-8. 4 through 8 was 9 to 9:45. And during that time, we had a scoped out lesson for the entire year so that we're all teaching those lessons, but they were developmentally appropriate. So, what kindness looks like in kindergarten will be different, of course, than the kindness lesson in 5th grade or 8th grade. Our counselors created those lessons for the teachers, so we pushed them out on a PowerPoint. So then the teachers didn't have to then create this extra lesson. I
mm,
said, if you want to, you can, but it just needs to be on kindness. But nobody did. They just tweaked that lesson that we gave them. But we also had a block for things as they came up. So, for example, field trips became an issue, or let me use a better analogy or strategy than that. Let's say how to apologize. And we were realizing so many of our kids don't know how to apologize. What does it mean to say I'm sorry? It means you want to try not to do it again, right? Like, what does that actually mean? How do you apologize? So we could then plug in how to apologize into the SEL scope and sequence. And then the entire school is getting that same lesson. And that's where the beauty of that SEL block. So it's not just tied to the SEL curriculum, that's a part of it. But
mhm.
Wednesdays was all about all kinds of different wellness topics as they came up.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. I know that.
Well, and then to sort of follow up on what Steve is saying is that you would then model and practice and showcase the thing that you learned on Wellness Wednesday during
Yes.
your lesson. Like
Yep.
as you're teaching and something happens, you practice apologizing when you run into
Yes.
somebody.
In real
I rem-
time. Right.
Yes, in real time to showcase
Mm-hmm.
it. Sorry, the random thing of me being gigantic and pregnant in the classroom and constantly hitting this one child with my belly over and over again because of where he sat popped in my head. And he probably thought that I didn't mean that I was sorry because I kept.
Well, a good time to model, like, oops, I need to work
I'm
on my apology.
right. Oh, he was a good sport though.
Yeah.
You
I
kind of had to be.
yeah, he was such a good kid. Um, and now I can sit here and think you said that sometimes the administrators are the ones that are not so supportive of SEL. So what if
Mm.
you have teachers wanting to do this, but their administrator is like, nah.
Nah, no time for that. No time for that. I see it kind of all over the board. Sometimes I see admin that are super excited and invested and they want to do it. Other times I see an SEL committee or a group of folks that teachers that are like, I heard this is going great. We really want this to bring to our school. But if you happen to be at one of those schools where the admin is not on board, we can't let it stop us if that's what we want to do. And so I would say, start small in your own classroom, implementing SEL practices, and the book can really help you with what those practices are and how to get that going, and then show some amazing results. So if you did nothing versus a soft start and a mindful moment, you would see significant positive outcomes in your classroom just from doing those two things over time as it builds up. And then you could integrate some of the direct, explicit SEL lessons into your content, and then bring it to life, just like what we talked about. Then find your like-minded colleagues. You know how we do that. There's a group of us now that are doing it. Look at the success of the fourth grade team, and people will see and people will notice. And then you'll probably get a lot more attention. And if you don't, just hit me up. I'll call your principal and tell them why they need to be doing it. I don't mind to be that person.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I like with kind of, this super important conversation and what this may look like across schools, across states, right? I'd imagine that equity plays a big role with the implementation and what this all looks like. Can you speak on what the equity piece looks like with SEL and what that may entail?
Yeah, when we're thinking about this idea of equity and an idea of ensuring all students, regardless of background, race, culture, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, ableism, whatever that is, it's how do we set it up for all students to be able to succeed? And if SEL is not incorporating that, then it's really not about social and emotional learning, which is creating positive outcomes for everybody. It cannot be something separate. It has to be integrated together of creating this inclusive environment for students and for staff. I say that too. But we are taking into consideration these people's different life, what they've been through, what their life looks like, and how do we support them in really just being successful and feeling cared for and a sense of belonging. And so I think it can help us create this more just and compassionate culture. I know that we saw that for sure. Like compassion was a lesson that we taught. And I can't tell you how that really came to life in school in a lot of different situations. For example, we closed the year with a service project. And so the students got to come together and talk about how do we kind of want to make the world a little bit of a better place, a more just, compassionate place. And so the classrooms got to choose what their topic was. We gave them a budget of $100, and they got to go and just implement this and to feel what it's like to do your part to make the world a better place. So it went from kindergarten, which did a lemonade stand in the front of the school, and they gave away the lemonade. They couldn't take any cost from it. Now they decided on what they want to do. And I remember like third grade went and cleaned up a neighbor's backyard. They knew it was a mess and they went and asked them, would you like some help? And so they got to feel what that feels like. And to our eighth graders, which really blew me away, they went to the district office and did a little food stand there. I'm sorry, a coffee stand, and took coffee to the district office, including the bus drivers and the people that work in the warehouse and the maintenance. And they wouldn't take any money for it. I'm like, no, we're just doing this. We called it Marysville Gives Back. What we were doing is creating this idea of compassion in action, like, and letting them feel this sense of making the world a better place, not just receiving and taking, which our kids got everything free. They got free breakfast, they got free lunch, they got free backpacks, they got free everything. But I wanted them to feel the power of giving, being grateful, and then giving back to others. And so that would just be what I would say, that, you know, just creating this sense of belonging. It's doing this direct instruction around it, but then bringing it alive with some action steps and in small ways to hope then they take on bigger projects as they get older, once they feel into that, what that feels like.
Yes, to all that. Like, I feel like even like adults could even still right now benefit from SEL, like in the workplace.
Hands down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At this
like,
time of year too, right? Like what as a country, the divisive nature we have right now.
Yeah. I just keep on thinking like how I kind of experience, I don't know, off the top of my head, going to Costco. And kind of the things that you experience as a result of being there, right? Like not grateful, not kind, no compassion,
How
right?
different would Black Friday be if everyone had
Oh,
SEL
Just
training?
imagine.
I don't go out because I don't want to see another human being on Black Friday.
yeah.
It doesn't bring out the best
Sophie be
version of ourselves.
Sophie be
I know.
Amazoning her Black Friday.
For sure.
Cool. Yeah. So the super powerful conversation, Lana, that you're providing and that you're offering. One, as we do come up to the close here, one thing, if you have seen the show before, that we ask our guests towards the end, and you may have already touched on this, but you know, the under the hat, right? Like what is top of mind for you right now, with the work that you've done? And again, you may have touched on it, but when you see what's going on at the moment, what is under the hat for you?
I'd like to just, I have been thinking about that, and I would like to share an analogy if I could, which kind of can help people understand what social and emotional learning is, because sometimes people are like, I'm not quite clear what that means. Like, be kind or be nice. What does that even mean? And it is this idea of an analogy based on water, from lake, river, waterfall. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before in ways of making an analogy. But let's say you have the lake, and the classroom or the school is a lake. And when it's calm and the waters are peaceful, learning is taking place, communities are being built, there's a healthiness, there's a happiness for students and staff. And then you get to the river, and that's where you got some white water, some churn is occurring. It's hard for learning to take place. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of it's a struggle, right? And then we've got the waterfall, and those are schools, classrooms, students that are in crisis, like they're going over the waterfall. And what I see with social and emotional learning is many schools spend a large amount of time in the churn of the river. It is all about just surviving, educators surviving, students kind of surviving. How do we just keep it from going over the waterfall? And what I'm offering is we have got to put more attention on creating the lake, creating a larger lake, which creates a smaller river and hopefully few, if any, students that then fall over the waterfall. And in fact, what we have now is a sickness model, which is all of the attention on the churn and the waterfall. And I say we can do it better and we can do it differently. And that is by focusing on the lake through social and emotional learning.
Oof, I love that. Yeah. Calm waters. Maybe more boring things. And so Sophie sends me a thing anytime I'm traveling at an airport. She always sends me I hope you have a boring flight. Like, hope you have a boring time. And the first time I read that, and I was like, what do you mean? I'm not boring. But it's like,
Yeah.
it's that idea that calm, right? Hope it's
Yes.
calm. I hope it's boring. I
Yes.
hope, um,
It is
and so that's kind of
uneventful.
Yes.
uneventful. Maybe that was the word that you wrote, but
Yes.
maybe boring is what I read. Um,
Yeah.
Of course it is.
yeah, awesome. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your mind. I'll drop everything link wise in the show
In the
notes,
show notes.
and we do see, like, so if people are watching, they can see it, but those that are listening, it looks like we can find you at Unlock SEL.
Unlocking SEL. Yep. Just if
Unlocking
you're,
SEL.
so I would say if you're a teacher, head on over and buy the book. I'm very excited. It did hit #1 in classroom management for new
Mm.
releases. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, we can start getting some management, creating the large lake. I was literally saying that to myself and realizing I need to take a break. I've been doing this too long. I'm thinking in those terms. And we do have a free workbook that we're giving out for folks that get the book.
Mm.
And there's information on unlockingsel.com .com/book. And then if you're a principal, I would really encourage you to reach out to me. I would love to talk to you about potential partnerships that we could do. Right now, we're working in schools in California, Oregon, and Washington, and look forward to adding some new states to us.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. That's exciting. I wish you all the luck in making those connections. I do think it's, and Sophie and I, if you can say this in confidence, that we're both in support of this work and how important it is. And so again, thank you for being on. For those that are watching, listening though, kind of looking ahead into next week, we do have, and you are not seeing double, and I'll kind of explain what I mean by that probably next week. Sophie has
I'm
a
going to be
hard
surrounded
firewall here.
by beards next week.
So
Oh no!
next week we have a good friend of mine, Scott Nunes, on the show. Scott, if you are catching this in any way, please go fill out the registration form. But I had no idea what to call this episode and what he wants to talk about. We kind of had this blocked out for him. The Man Behind the Beard, that's the running title that we're going to be rolling with. Scott is a good friend of mine. Scott, him and I, we taught at the same district in the same school. And apparently Scott and I look alike. And so people would confuse us and still confuse us today. Excited to dive into that part of the chat. But tune in next weekend, November 9th. We're looking at 10 a.m. my time and then 1 p.m. everyone else. That's normally how that goes. Sophie time, Eastern time. So looking forward to that chat and diving into the work that Scott has done. And so please tune in next weekend. But until then, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go to calls to do.
I'll throw in there, Scott,
What's
it's time to update your photo.
What's wrong with this photo?
Oh, it's a beautiful
Looks
photo.
lovely.
It does look lovely.
Okay, we're gonna have to
grown
mention him.
since then.
What, the beard?
He has matured. Yes. He has matured.
It happens.
He is now a
happens.
silver fox.
So those that know me well, like, I just turned 39, and I'm starting to freak out a little bit because I have one gray hair. You can't see it, thank goodness. One gray hair. I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to start dyeing it. I'm not ready for that.
Stop. I'm younger than you and have way more gray hairs than you do.
I have heard your first gray hair, with it comes a great idea. So did you have this moment?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm still waiting.
It probably came. I was going to say it was the podcast.
Yeah, maybe that was it.
It was the podcast. Yes, it was the podcast.
There you go. Gray hair idea. That's the title of my next book. I love that. Gray hair idea.
I love it.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the work you folks do too, bringing some positiveness to education. Thank you.
Oh yeah, of course. We love it. I get to do this with my best friend. I think
Oh,
that's the best part of it. But yeah, Lana, thank you so much. For everyone else tuning in, thank you so much. Until next time, keep your hats on, but your minds open. Y'all have a lovely Saturday.